Alright, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD, or Application and Website Development Program, I've been working on a series of video presentations for the AWD 1111.NET Programming with Web Databases class. Changing direction a little bit, I found this site that I think is just really nice online. And it's called .netcurry.com. You may have heard of it. You may not have. But when you look in here, for instance, under tutorials, notice what they have tutorials on. I'm not going to look at, read any of them to you. But you can see this. And I think this is a site I'm going to start using perhaps quite a bit. But one of the things I did was I went over to their ASP.NET MVC. And it said here they have 147 ASP.NET MVC tutorials and articles, which have been read by over 15 million people. I've started going through these. Of course, there's no way I could go through all of them, nor do I have the desire to go through all of them. That said, I found three I thought were of particular interest, and those are the History of ASP.NET Part 1. There we go. The History of ASP.NET Part 2 and the History of ASP.NET Part 3. So I thought I'd spend a little bit of time right now going over those. You'll notice that this first one, was near the end of April, I should say, of this year, the next day, and beginning of May 2019. So they're quite relevant. I don't want to sit there and read this article to you. I printed it out. I very, very quickly looked through it. But just to give us some historical perspective about what's going on. So notice the first version of ASP.NET was released 17 years ago. So we're talking 2002. All right. So as it says, this is the first part of a series of 3 articles that cover the history, all right, from its launch to where we currently are. So you can click on here, etc. And I will let's just take a second here. Here are the URLs. I'll leave them up there for just a minute. All right, you can always take a screenshot, and I do a lot of that where I'll come through here, just hit the print screen button, come up in here, bring up Paint. And with Paint up, just, put that in there. All right. Now, it's interesting because they talk about the ASP.NET Web Forms era. When I started here at Rankin Technical College, the first time I taught the AWD 1111.NET Framework with Web Databases class, I believe was in the fall of 2017. And the textbook that I taught it with, which is a really good book, it's a book by Muroc, but it's dated in that the book has like 25 chapters in it, and the first 24 chapters are on ASP.NET Web Forms. All right, but you notice that these were, these are old. Okay. Now they talk a little bit about different stuff in here with web stuff. I'm not going to go into any of that. We get that in other classes. All right. So notice it says the turn of the millennium saw Microsoft with a few significant fronts open. Number one, it failed to take over Java. Java's still the #1 programming language in June of 2019. Number 2, it needed a better solution for building and hosting web apps in Windows. Number 3, Visual Basic 6 needed a replacement. So Microsoft, as it said, came up with its own managed and interpreted platform, .NET Framework, the C# and VB.NET languages. But the problem was they still were GUI like this. So as it says, WinForms was designed to be the successor for VB6. Fine. WebForms was designed following the page controller system. The thing is, when you brought things up in here, for virtually every time you brought up a file, you had a file that had your web form on it. Then you had another file with the same name. So this file would have been called helloworld.aspx, but then there'd be another file connected to it, which was called the code behind file. So that would be the same name with a .cs on the end. So as they mention here, each web form had two distinct parts. The ASPX template that defined the HTML of the page, and the class that implemented the page controller and provided the logic. All right, was this bad? No, not at all. In many ways, this was like writing C# right now, just standard C#, except for the fact that they're really, it's just one file. But the point is, with the GUI-ness, so to speak, of web forms is a lot like writing GUI C# programs right now. All right. Notice it says the framework provided a set of controls that could be used on each page. These are known as server controls. They weren't standard HTML tags. The final HTML and JavaScript sent to the client is generated by the framework while rendering the page. Okay, they look very similar to the old type of client controls, but they basically were set up to work with the server. Notice, server controls can render the necessary HTML and JavaScript to process an event. All right. Each page, as mentioned here, contained a single HTML form, which would cause the browser to submit it as a post request in the same URL. Now, good things, bad things about them. Good news was, going from C# to this class wasn't that really that big of a transition. Bad news was, this wasn't probably the best way of doing things. All right, now they show the flow of action in here, not that different from the way it is with what we're doing in class right now. We've got more to it. All right, but the ideas are similar in nature, as they should be. It says the trick was possible by combining state management and a page lifecycle. With this page lifecycle, a lot of stuff happened behind the scenes. And I mean a lot of stuff. As it says here, the framework is designed assuming most of the work would be done by the server, with the client mostly just rendering HTML and issuing new GET and POST requests. Overall, it says here, ASP.NET succeeded in its objectives of providing a model closer to a desktop development. However, its model over a stateless network combined with an abstraction that hid the web from developers ended up hurting it in the long run. So there had to be a different way of doing things. It says even though it was a success, the .NET framework was still in its infancy and much in need of maturing and refining. So as you'd guess, they kept coming up with new versions, new releases, etc. And they talk about some of the stuff. We're not using it anymore, so I'm not going to go through this. All right. View state over time was improved and reduced in size. That was a good thing. Achieving a good, consistent look and feel was now capable by master pages. As it says, master pages are closer to layouts that we use now. You could create a sitemap, which was an XML file. If you've ever done any work with a website, you might have created a sitemap. The idea is virtually the same. The lifecycle was updated with new events. Cross-page postbacks were now allowed. Caching was improved. Web parts was put in there to allow you to personalize your website. Finally, as it says, the factory designer pattern was combined with generics to create providers. All right. So as time went on, as they mentioned right here, it was now around 2008. And they actually had a product in here that was pretty good. But that was right around the time, as it says right here, the biggest change was provided by the first iPhone. The web won't be the same. Well, in other words, we needed more. All right? So that came up with part 2. And I'll come back with that in just a couple minutes.